Good morning and welcome. And thank you for joining us at the second panel, Global and Regional Conflict, Effects of Russia and Ukraine's Conflict. Today we are joined by three speakers. Adriana Franco, who is here presential, Donia Dowidar, who is by streaming, and Ahmed Taher. So first of all, I am going to introduce them briefly, and I am going to start with Adriana Franco. Adriana Franco holds a master's degree in Asian and African Studies from El Colegio de México, and a bachelor's degree in International Relations from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She is a professor at the Faculty of Political and Social Science at the SEB University and in the International Relations program at the Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro. She is a member of the Latin American Observatory of Geopolitics of the Institute of Economic Research at the UNAM, and a collaborator of the University Program of Studies on Asia and Africa. She has been a speaker at various events, including the Second International Colloquium on African Studies and the Fifth Conference of Strategic Studies. Her most recent articles are Women in Africa, Genealogies of Violence and Violence Against Women, analysis of three recent African novels. Welcome, Adriana. Our second speaker is Donia Dowidar. With over a decade of research in agricultural and rural economics, a focus on political economy of development has been established. Teaching experience spans 10 years, including both online and remote learning environments, and a diverse range of learners. The double qualification in economics and law offers a comprehensive understanding of the subject. Qualitative analysis and synthesis of economic data is a demonstrated skill, as is experience in administrative and pedagogical evaluation and support. 4 years of presidency in the French coordination of the FIAN NGO, Food First Information and Action Network, highlights leadership experience. Fluency in Arabic, French, and English presents strong communication abilities. And welcome to Donia, who is by streaming. And finally, I am going to introduce Ahmed Taher. He studied Bachelor of Economics and Political Science in the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University. He did a major specialization in political science and a minor specialization in economics. He also did a Bachelor of Law in the Faculty of Law in Cairo University. His master thesis in political science specialization is about international law and international organization. He did a PhD dissertation in political science, Faculty of Economic and Political Science, Cairo University. He is currently the director of Al-Hewar Center for Political and Media Studies, lecturer in political science and law, lecturer in the field of qualifying for political and diplomatic world. So thank you, and we are listening first to Donia Dowidar. She is by streaming, so please help us with.
So I will start to my presentation. So I would like to start by thanking you a lot for inviting me to this third international colloquium of studies in Africa. I have to thank especially the committee of the organization for the quality of the organization, and I want to specifically thank Professor Alicia Giron for inviting me and for the enormous work that has been done to organize this colloquium. So today I will share with you an in-progress paper that I'm working on. It's entitled, the title of the paper is The Russia-Ukraine War and How It Affects the Deepening of the Chronic Dependency in Egypt. So first of all, I want to share with you the plan of the presentation today. I will introduce very quickly, and then I will present the food regimes in Egypt and the impacts of the new liberal and corporate food regimes. And then I will present my alternative agri-system in terms of food sovereignty proposal. Then we will go to results and perspective. I want to share with you, this is the map of Egypt for the people who doesn't know this country. So just the green area here on the riverside, on the Nile riverside, both ones are representing the arable land in Egypt. So it's very small in proportion of the surface of Egypt, the superficies. So very quickly, you can see that there is a small increase of the arable land as a percentage of the land area in Egypt. It was like on 2000, it was like 2.8% of the total land area, and it's on 2020, it's almost 3.4% of the total land area of Egypt. But we have to not to be fooled by this increase of total arable land, because if we see the arable land hectares per person, so it was stagnation. From here, you can see on this one, so it's there is even a small decrease. So it went from here in the 70s, 0.7 hectares per person to now 0.03 now. So it's very, it's decreasing actually. In the introduction, I want to present you to the national context of the last decade in Egypt. So in 2008, we had the food riots in Egypt, and there was dead people for the queues of bread, for buying bread. And then we have the 2011 revolution. The main slogan was bread, freedom, and social justice. And then we can see that there is a crisis of the Egyptian agri-foods. There is some structural causes, but mainly there is conjunctural causes that evokes this crisis every time, like COVID, like Ukraine war, and I will explain later why. And we can observe, so that we can see that there is a major food dependency of the agri-food system in Egypt, because Egypt eats mainly the basic food commodity in Egypt is bread, and bread is made from wheat, and we are the first importer of wheat in the world. So you can see on the right here that we are on the first country on the top 10 of the importance of wheat. And we can see also that we have a chronic deficit of the Egyptian trade balance on the left side, my left side. And then I want to also talk about poverty in Egypt, that it's mainly a rural phenomenon. Poverty rate, it's almost 32.5% of the population. It's more, of which more than 60% live in the rural areas. And today, I told you the global image of what's happening in the agri-food system. I want to focus more on the magnitude of the impact of the war in Ukraine on the agri-food system in Egypt. So first of all, in March 2022, there was a publication of the MEI Policy Center that said that overnight, there was a huge increasing of the prices of wheat, 44%, and for wheat, and for the prices of sunflower oil, it's 32%. To explain this, so we are dependent of Ukraine and Russia for like 85% of the wheat coming from outside Egypt. And when it concerns the sunflower oil, we are 73% dependent on the Russian-Ukrainian markets for our supplies. So that's why the magnitude of this impact of this war was huge on the agri-food system in Egypt. And then I want to show you some things to explain. Egypt has a specificity that the private consumption has an enormous percentage of the nominal GDP in Egypt. So it's above the average rate of the North African countries. It's the average rate, it's between like 59, 60. Egypt private consumption percentage of nominal GDP, it's always like for the last decades, it's between 80 and more. on sometimes little bit less, but you will see on the quarter that the war began in Ukraine, that the consumption decreased from 82% of the GDP to 77% because of the inflation and the increasing of prices of wheat and other basic commodity in Egypt that are mostly imported from Ukraine and Russia. So I will come back on the main introduction. It was to introduce you to what's happening exactly and why it's very important to see the impact of this war on the agri-food system in Egypt. So the main objectives of my paper, it was to identify the causes of the agri-food system recurrent crisis and what are the main challenges that are facing the agri-food system in Egypt and its actors too, and to identify the evolution of the agrarian question in Egypt throughout the three food regimes that I will present later, but very fast, and we can discuss this later in the question. And I want to introduce you my theoretical framework. I chose to work on the food regime theory because this approach provided me specially of a macro historical framework and holistic analysis of the agri-food system on the world or international level that permitted me to understand what is happening on the national market of Egypt. And why especially food regime theory? Because this theory represents us an analytical framework that allows us to articulate what happens in the international relation of production, consumption, marketing of agri-food products in the world, and it articulates this to the form of the capitalistic accumulation that distinguish the different periods of the capitalistic transformation since 1870. So it was firstly presented by Friedman and McMichael. So I adopted this theory to explain what happened to Egypt, how the food or the chronic food dependency was created, how the agri-food system in Egypt was restructured through the British hegemony, the American hegemony, the corporate hegemony later. And my conceptual framework, it's mainly food sovereignty, because for me, it's a political tool and also an operational framework towards the alternative of the agri-food regimes that I'm presenting, and it's a rights-based approach. So I will go very fast on the food regimes, but I will present the main characteristics so you can understand historically how the chronic dependency of Egypt was created through those different food regimes. The first one is the colonial food regimes. So here it was the British hegemony. So to be as brief as possible, back then in 1861, the American Civil War was happening. So Great Britain lost her wheat basket, and they went to Egypt so they can replace this wheat basket from America and to Egypt. So they started to restructure the agri-food system to serve the interest of Great Britain to export wheat and later cotton. And a lot of restructuring of the agri-food system was mainly to serve the British colonization happened in this era. And then we can see the neoliberal food regime. It started from 1950, and we will see from 1950 to 1970 an American hegemony that was in place, and they started to introduce their system, the very well-known program Food for Peace. So it was and food aid, and they started to go to the countries and said, okay, you don't have to have substance agriculture. We can give you weight as an aid, and you can focus on another crops like the cash crops and the more exportable crops in agriculture. So we will see that the history there, but to be brief, the wheat imports in Egypt rose from 0.1 in 1951 to now, actually, it's representing we are importing like 50% of our basic need in wheat. And then we have finally to explain what is the corporate food regime. It starts around 1980. So it starts with what we call the Infitah policies, the new liberal policy that was adopted by President Sadat back then. And it conciliated with the program of structural adjustment of the FMI in the World Bank. And then we started to see that there is different actors, corporate actors, that are integrating the food regime in Egypt or the agro-food system in Egypt, because we will see that the transnational firm had a lot of difficulties to integrate the Egyptian market. So it was due to the bureaucracy, that corruption, administration, and the heavy procedures to integrate the market. So they choose an intermediate capital, it's the Gulf capital, to integrate the Egyptian market. So I can give you partnerships between the Gulf and the Western brands very, very briefly to show you. Americana, it's a Kuwaiti Gulf company, and it had the franchise of KFC, Heinz, Hardee's, Pizza Hut, Baskin-Robbins, and in Egypt. And El Marai, it's a Saudi company, so it has the franchise of PepsiCo in Egypt and Jordan. El Shaya, the Kuwaiti one, it has the franchise of Starbucks in Egypt and other Middle Eastern and Northern African countries. Olayan, it's a Saudi one, and it has the franchise of Coca-Cola, and so on. The impacts of the neoliberal and corporate food regime mainly that they have a role. This foreign capital had an impact and a huge role in reshaping our food system. Okay, we had systemic and systematic risks that occurred. We can say the deepening of the food dependency and the reliance on food imports. We can see that we replaced the cash crops replaced the subsistence agriculture in Egypt. That's why we now import 50% of our need in wheat. We see that we have a high volatility of food prices each time there is a crisis or an increasing of prices on the international markets. Egypt is directly and very, very quickly impacted. We can see it on the 2008 to 2007 international crisis and agro-food system crisis. And then we had the food riots in Egypt. 2011, there was the peak of the food prices worldwide. And then we have the evolution in Egypt with the slogan of the bread. Then we can see, like I explained before, the impact of the Ukrainian war on the agro-food and the increasing prices of wheat and sunflower oil in Egypt. And we have mainly other things, aspects like food diet shifts. Mainly, we have a double burden of malnutrition, undernourishment, and overnourishment. There are 14% of all the children that are sent in Egypt, they are overweight at the same time, and it represents a little bit of 31.2% of children aged between 6 and 5 in Egypt. And we have a main degradation of biodiversity and soil fertility because the foreign capital and the other food regime, British ones and the American ones, they are imposing an intensive productivist agriculture means of production. So we have 50% of the Delta land suffers from salinity, 50% of the 3.4% of the total Arab land that we have. So it's huge. And we have also social impacts and rural and farmer impoverishment. Like I said before, we have till now 57% of our population, they are rural, and between 60 and 70% of the poverty in Egypt are very concentrated in the rural areas. So I want to go back very briefly on the global agri-food system crisis to show you that there is a very intimate relationship between the global agri-food system crisis and the recurrent crisis that's happening in our agri-food system. There is a chronic hunger. There is the manifestation of this global agri-food system crisis. It's the chronic hunger, the rural poverty, like I showed you in Egypt, the excess production. And we have to a paradoxical observation that the problem, it's not the sufficiency of food on the market. The problem is the access, because most of the hunger person are farmers or in rural areas. So it has the main problem of this global agri-food system is an access to food issue. And we have the systemic nature of the crisis in the agri-food system. So in terms of response to crisis, there is two types of policies, the top-down ones and the bottom-up policies. The top-down policies, they are known as the New Liberal Action Plan. This is that the market, it will automatically remedy himself and he can go out from the crisis, and it proves how it doesn't work and it's insufficient, and the market, it never auto-repair himself. And the Reformers Action Plan, it's based on the development aid, but we saw till now that the development aid, it wasn't a sufficient tool to remedy to the crisis actually in the African countries. And then there is the second option, the bottom-up policies response to the crisis. So we can see two types of action plan. The progressive one, it's like slow food and fair trade and a lot of other social justice movements. But the problem of those movements that it was accessible to the elite, and say, because it costs a little bit more on the market. So it's the elite classes that they have the awareness that can use this. And it wasn't that sufficient to, as a response to the crisis, to remedy to the crisis existence. I'm explaining all of this because what we chose in this paper was a radical action plan. It's a food sovereignty-based action plan, but we have to understand what is food sovereignty. Food sovereignty it's an alternative agri-food system, and it has its own framework, and it focuses on 6 pillars. The food for people. We will value more the food producer. They are our main priority. We will choose to localize our food system. We will put a local control upon it. We will build knowledge and skills that are farmer-based, and we will work with nature to respect the biodiversity. Then we can, I don't want to explain the concept itself because it will take time, but if you have questions, we can go back on this one in the discussions one. So I want to present you what is happening on the food sovereignty concept. Bottom-up policies, it's food sovereignty was brought by Via Campesina, which is an organization. It's a civil society organization. This civil society organization is formed of like one or now 200 other association, farmers and others, and they are working on institutionalization of food sovereignty. So they are bringing food sovereignty to the UN, so people and other countries, and we can create a legal framework that encompasses the food sovereignty as a concept and as a right. And then they are working, every association, they are working on the implementation at the national level of food sovereignty to create the legal and the political framework for this concept. And then we will work, the paper shows how we started to have an institutional recognition of the food sovereignty in Egypt. Because after the revolution in 2014, a new constitution was written, And in the new constitution, it was the first time in the history of Egypt that food sovereignty becomes a constitutional right of everyone that guarantees us the protection of our agriculture, our biological diversity, and types of local plant to preserve the rights of generation and seeds in Egypt. But the problem that it was a constitutional right, it was mainly an ink on paper. So we have the legal framework, but the problem that the policies that came after this constitution, it proved that it's only written on paper, but it's not a real political choice by the government there, because we joined on 2017 the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plant, the UPOV, in 2017. So we granted patent-like protection to seed breeders, and mainly what's happening, they take farmers' ancestral seeds and they transform it, they work on it to change a little bit of its specificities in laboratories, and then they patent like those seeds, and the farmers aren't allowed anymore to use their ancestral seeds existing. We can see that we were self-sufficient in rice, and the new laws due to the hydraulic poverty that now that farmers aren't allowed to cultivate rice anymore, that there is a quota and we can go beyond it. So we will be soon dependent on the international market for rice too. And I wanted to present very quickly the socioeconomic challenges of the triple sovereignty in Egypt. We have a first challenge in terms of land sovereignty. We have shrinking of arable land, we have soil erosion, we have urbanization, housing crisis. We have a problem, an issue of land grabbing, the fragmentation of agricultural holding. And the second level, it's on the challenges on the level of the seed and hydraulic sovereignty. Like I said before, the approval of the UPOV conventions on the patent lives of the seeds. And the second problem is the water poverty and the construction of a Nahda Dam in Ethiopia. So the third problem or challenge that we have, it's on the level of the food sovereignty. We have a chronic food dependency and widespread abandonment of food crops, the subsistence agriculture, and we have the double burden of malnutrition, undernourishment, and obesity. So to remedy to all this in a different and alternative agri-food system, we have main levers of action that we have to do in Egypt. We have to work an agrarian reform. We have to implement an agroecology-based policies for production. And we have to implement the Declaration of Peasant Rights that was signed by Egypt lately on 2019 at the UN level. Very quickly, the agroecology tool as an operational framework, what does it mean? It means that we reconcile the farmer practices, the ancestral farmers, their know-how, the field skills they have with the academic work and the knowledge on a local level. We use science, we use in environmental science, and we use social and sociology to work with those farmers and to put in place their know-how and to assist them on a daily basis with a more scientific and environmental policies, actually. And we have to work, agroecology framework works with social movements, the bottom-up policies, and we reorient the policies actually applied in Egypt, and we have like a full detailed programs that we can discuss later. So I don't want to be pessimistic on the results and the concluding remark of this paper. We have to know that food democracy is indispensable to have food sovereignty. And all the challenges and obstacles to achieve food sovereignty doesn't mean that it's impossible to achieve it, because we have a lot of opportunities actually existing. Egypt has agriculture in Egypt. It's still controlled by the peasant mode of production, and agricultural holdings of less than 3 acres represent 86% of the total. And we have a high rate still now of self-sufficiency and efficiency of agriculture
Donia,
produce.
sorry, you have to close now, please.
Yes, I'm
To
finished.
finish, yes.
Okay, and we have we are till now 68% self-sufficient, which it's a good thing. We have to work in it and deepen it. And we have the legal framework now that helps us to integrate the right of food sovereignty and to integrate it to a real political framework. And the problem is that nothing will change without a political will to regain control locally and nationally over our agro-food system, what doesn't exist till now. Thank you very much for your attention, all of you. And sorry for being long.
Thank you. Don't worry. Well, I think all of us here agree with the importance of food dependency and food security. Now we are listening to Adriana Franco, please, she is talking about the Africa and the intercapitalist dispute, resonance of Russia and Ukraine conflict. You have 20 minutes, and I am let you know when your time is over.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And well, first of all, I want to thank the Programa Universitario de Estudios sobre Asia y África for the invitation. Also, all the organizers for making this colloquium possible. My colleagues, well, with whom I share this space, and all of you who came here to listen and share some ideas with us. I also want to say something. I'm justifying myself, but I usually don't do this, but I'm gonna read my presentation. My English is a little bit rushed, so with the intention to be clear and fluent, I'm gonna do that. So, as Andrea has said, the title of my presentation is Africa in the Intercapitalist Dispute, Resonances of Russo-Ukrainian Conflict. So I will start. It is February 2022. On the radio, we learned that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has begun. We are in Bangui, the capital of Central African Republic. And while we are listening to the news on the radio, we also watch a woman placing flowers on a statue. The sculpture represents 7 bodies. One is of a woman hugging her 2 children, and the other 4 are Russian soldiers protecting them. We do not understand what is happening. While Western media claims that Russia has invaded Ukraine, Central African populations are demonstrating in the streets with banners reading, Central African Republic with Russia. How did we get to this situation? Since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine began in 2022, the dominant narrative regarding the study of the African continent has reproduced coloniality. The main speech that spread worldwide was that the African continent could face a severe famine because many of the wealth and pesticides that reached the continent were exported from the territories in conflict. According to Martin Armstrong, a data analyst, and I will quote him, Russia and Ukraine imports account for 30% of all African wheat consumption. In the case of Egypt, for example, this figure is closer to 80%. End of the quote. And although these data are accurate, the image of a catastrophe in Africa due to the war in Ukraine continues to represent the continent as an empty space without agency, and Africans as people who cannot adapt to the context they are living. Therefore, if we do not historize or contextualize, that speech will be colonial. So we need to historize and contextualize in order to understand dependency, as it has been mentioned before. Therefore, if we do, sorry, historically, subsistence agriculture has guaranteed the living of African people in the face of the structural violence of the capitalist system, even though this practice is considered unproductive from the point of view of classical economics. However, in the face of ecological crisis that we are facing, that we are experiencing nowadays, the subsistence economy is a proposal based on the care economy in order to protect life. Thinking of it in this way breaks with the linearity imposed by the system, and it could also allow us to think of a different relationship with nature, not from the human nature split of modernity, but one of relationality. By June, the war in Ukraine had generated an intense refugee crisis. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency data, by that month, there were already 4.8 million Ukrainian refugees, most of whom headed for Europe to request protection. This humanitarian situation also reflected systemic racism. The UN Refugee Agency noted that, and I quote again, European Union member states have taken unprecedented steps, rapidly activating the Temporary Protection Directive for the first time, guaranteeing access to protection and service for refugees from Ukraine. End of the quote. However, the treatment given to African refugees has been very different. With this, I do not want to say that Ukrainians should not be helped, but we should ask why it is easy to help certain bodies and not others. Even during the war, European media claimed that war was common in Africa. However, it must not have to occur in Europe. They also noted that the refugees' bodies were black, not white. These narratives strengthened the coloniality of bodies and beings, which value people based on phenotypic characteristics based on the subject of colonial capitalist modernity. That is to say, the white, bourgeois, European, heteronormative, and among other men. While these speeches were projected in Western media, Russia was establishing its presence not only in Ukraine, but also in Africa. Proof of this is the Bangui demonstrations mentioned at the beginning of the talk. At the beginning of the 21st century, the intercapitalist dispute spread throughout Africa. This confrontation implies the dispute over the direction or control of the capitalist system, not its transformation or a change in its reproduction. In Africa, governments and corporations from the United States, Russia, and China mainly are the main subjects that dispute hegemony. However, for this presentation, only the presence of the second one will be deeply analyzed. The United States began to have a more significant presence in Africa since 2003 because of the fight against terrorism. Later, in 2007, the US created a new command for the region, the United States African Command, or AFRICOM. Subsequently, they deployed small mobile military bases called lilypads and encouraged the deployment of private security forces. Likewise, they intervened directly in the territory with the operation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Libya, for example, and the support for the French troops in Mali. For its part, Russia also began to have a more visible presence in Africa. During the first decades of the 21st century, trade between Russia and Africa increased by 185%. The leading importers of Russia products are Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Tunisia, Senegal, Sudan, and South Africa, while the main exporters are South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Tunisia, Kenya, and Ghana. Trade between Russia and the continent went from 1.5 billion in 2000 to 12.2 billion in 2014. Two-thirds of this is concentrated in North Africa, especially in Algeria and Morocco. The most important region for Russia is North Africa, because Russian government consider it to be the neighborhood of Eurasian region, and therefore central to its national security. The continent has also been represented as a fundamental space to guarantee the supply of geostrategic resources, because Russia and Africa possess nearly half of the world's biogenetic materials, fresh water, and minerals, according to Daniel and Shubin. In such a way, Russia, as the US, also represents the African continent as a repository of hegemonic fantasies. It is projected as a plate without decision-making capacity, which will allow it to position itself in the intercapitalist dispute, a place of extraction. In 2011, Russia held a business forum in Ethiopia in which representatives from Mali, Niger, Sudan, Zimbabwe, and also Russian oil and gas sector participated. Russia has secured concessions for oil and gas fields in Algeria with Gazprom and Lukoil. Gazprom and Lukoil are two of the most important oil and gas companies in Algeria. So in Russia, sorry. In addition, in the Western region, Russia is planning a series of pipelines, including the one that will run from Nigeria to Algeria to transport gas from Africa to Europe. Russia also knows the importance of rare earth elements and the concentration of them on the African continent. Actually, Vasilev considered that Russia has the technology to take advantage of these resources. Once again, the continent as a space for the extraction of these resources for the benefit of the subjects that dispute the hegemony worldwide. Russia companies are also interested in uranium from the continent for developing nuclear energy. Rosatom is the leading supplier of nuclear reactors worldwide, also a Russian corporation. And although there are uranium deposits that Russia can access more quickly, such as the deposits in Kazakhstan, for example, these are insufficient for Russian corporate interests. Rosatom's nuclear reactor contracts establish that the plants will be supplied with fuel during their entire period of operation, which ranges from 50 to 60 years, more or less. For that, it's essential that Russia guarantees access to this energy, to these resources. On the other hand, since 2006, Russia has negotiated with African countries the conversion of the debt they contracted during the Soviet era. However, this action has also been accompanied by a military presence. For example, and now I quote Subir, after converting its debt to Russia in 2006, Algeria has spent 7 billion to buy Russian weapons, including new model MiG-29 jets, tanks, and other heavy weapons to enhance the capabilities of its armed forces. End of the quote. In Africa, Russia has established itself as the second arms seller in the entire continent. Actually, 13% of Russian weapons find their way to Africa. The primary recipients are Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, and Sudan. However, between 2017 and 2018, the main ones were Algeria, Egypt, Angola, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mali, Nigeria, and Sudan. Equatorial Guinea, sorry. In addition to the arms sales, in 2015, Russia conducted a military exercise as part of the activities of its multinational joint task force. The armed forces of Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria participated in this action. Thus, in recent years, not only has the United States been training with local forces to counter the obstacle it faces in the continent, but also Russia is strengthening its capabilities in the region. In 2016, Morocco and Russia made a joint declaration to combat transnational terrorism. Likewise, Russia has had rapprochement with the Tobruk regime in Libya, which continues without the recognition of the so-called international society. These rapprochements are not accidental, since for Russia, as I told before, North Africa is the second most important area for its security interest after Western Asia. According to the Institute for War Studies, this country has at least 21 military cooperation agreements with African countries. Also, according to Western sources, Russian mercenaries forces such as Wagner, for example, are operating in Libya and Mali. The deployment of American and Russian interests in Africa is based on violence for the extraction of critical resources. This is a direct threat to the well-being of the communities. During the first anniversary of the Russo-Ukrainian War, South Africa hosted naval exercises with Russia and China. The United States and the European Union highly criticized this exercise. Still, South Africa argued that this is exclusively defensive and to improve its military and defense capabilities. The South Africa government also pointed out that on other occasions, it has carried out military exercises with Western forces because it is common to do so between countries. So the exercise with Russia and China should not represent a problem. Likewise, in recent years, both the government and the African people have rejected the continuation of Western interference, particularly the French presence. In some cases, they have even indicated that they prefer the Russian one than the Western interference. In Mali, for example, the justification for this is that the French have been making everything worse for more than 10 years. Well, if we consider the colonial period, well, it could be more years, no? But thinking about serval operation, the implementation of serval operation, more or less 10 years, while they consider Russian forces more effective. So the people and the government make an association between violence and the military, no, and the military forces of Russia. But they also think that those forces are more effective than the Western ones. Thus, although they do not romanticize the Russian armed forces, they prefer Russian army to counteract the instability promoted by Western intervention. In March 2023, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Félix Tshisekedi, told Macron, the French president, and I quote, "Look at us differently by respecting us, by considering us as true partners, and not always with paternalistic look, with the idea of always knowing what is necessary for us." And well, I consider that the Russian presence in the continent is not an alternative to the American or French one, to the Western one, and that the intercapitalist dispute will foster war and violence in the continent. However, the approach to Russia shows the wariness of the people and also the demand for dignity. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. And now we are listening to Ahmed Taher, and he's online too. So please, you can help us with the screen. Thank you. Good morning and good night. You have the floor, please. Ahmed?
Yes, good night.
You have 20 minutes. Yeah?
You listen me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we listen to you.
Good night. You listen me?
Yes.
Welcome.
Creo que el filipino no se escucha, ¿no?
Please, I first thank you. University programs for studies and on Asia and Africa to invite me to participate this conference. I am happy to be with you. Please accept my apologies because my English is not very well, but I try to explain my idea in some points. My name is Ahmed Taher. I am the director of Al-Hewar Center for Political and Media Study in Egypt. And my papers is the title of my paper is Russian-Ukrainian Crisis and a Global Arms Race, Implication for Security and Development in Africa. My introduction try to confirm is that the Russian-Ukrainian crisis promote various countries of the world to increase the volume of their military spending. The world and I depended in the report which issued from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the last report entitled Military Balance Report 2023. This report points to the change in the military balance in 2023 as some regions such as Europe and Asia and which resulted to increasing their military spending. On the other hand, other regions had to reduce their military spending due to high inflation and the war economic repercussion. My paper divided two parts. The first part about the map of the world military spending. I try to give a map about which countries spend more on military and defenses because the crisis give many people to research about national security. So many people give more attention to the defense policy and the military. So the report which I depend on in this points give us some points, some indicators about which countries spend more and which countries reduce the spending on the military the spending in this year or in the future. The first indicators is about the increase in the European defense spending. The report referred to many European states had to increase their defense priorities. 20 states have announced in increasing in their military spending or they enhanced it with the long-term spending target. And the second indicator and the second point, America and China and Russia as forefronted in the terms of their defense. In their defense budget. For example, North America accounted for approximately 40% of global defense spending, followed by Asia at the 26% and Europe at the 17%. The United States and China remained among the largest countries globally in defense budget and the military spending in 2022. The third point, inflation reduced defense spending in many regions. Global defense spending grew in normal values in 2021 and 2022, but higher inflation meant lower spending in real values in both years. In recent years, في هذا العام, in this year, higher inflation has made a defense spending in real values in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and so on. And the fourth point, Middle East defense spending down compared to 2021. The Middle East rank ahead in global military spending relative to GDP. We can find 7 countries in the Middle East are on the list of the largest defensive budgets relative to GDP, but with lower rates than in 2021. Saudi Arabia and Iran ranked among the top 10 countries in terms of defense budget during 2022. The outcome of these points, of these parts, this means that the implication of this global trend can be monitored on the global economy in general by pointing out that this expansion in military spending has led to high inflation rates, sharp rises in commodity prices, and supply chain crisis, which in turn led to a decline in the economic recovery witnessed by some countries after the pandemic. On the other hand, the increased defense spending in Europe in particular would have a negative impact on the global economic environment in the short term, owing to further constraints on public spending resulting from the higher cost of debt financing with higher interest rates and the energy price. This is the first part for my paper. The second part, we discuss the implication of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis for security and the development in Africa. There is no doubt that it will have a wide-ranging impact on the development of the African countries and the relevant impact on its security situation and internal stability, which can be monitored through several points as follows. The first point in this part about the political division in Africa. The African countries faced a political dilemma in determining their position on the status quo, despite the clarity of the position of African institutions on this crisis, which is calling for respect for international law, territorial and national integrity, and respect for the sovereignty of Ukraine. This is the first impact about the crisis on the countries, African countries. This faced a political dilemma, because many countries of Africa cooperate with Russia and the other cooperate with Ukraine and with France and with the United States of America. So they faced the problems, they faced dilemma how to take a situation towards this crisis, although they express about their situation in respecting the international law and as I mentioned before. The second bucket, the economic repercussion related to the high levels of prices, especially food, wheat and corn, which represent both Russia and Ukraine as important source to meet the needs of these countries. The second, the security and the military repercussion and implication, and this implication are linked both to the military arrangement related to armament deals and the training, and the constantly increase in the value of the deals with one hand. Some of them stopped due to the Russian market's need for this weapon in its battle. On the other hand, which may lead to an increase in burdens on the general budget of the countries the African countries, as well as a negative impact on the ability of the governments to confront tourists, organization, and internal conflict. The first is a Forbes about the implications on the level of internal stability. And these implications are related to the size of the burdens that African countries will bear to provide financial resources to meet the rises in global price levels, whether related to their food or military needs, which puts African government in the confrontation with citizens, which threatens social and political stability in many countries. Conclusion. In the end of my papers, I try to give short about my papers too, but I think that all details to the conference and put the presentation to see with me. In light of the which I mentioned before, we concluded by saying that it has become necessary for African countries to search for new approaches that enable them to rearrange the economic, political, and military priorities by seizing some of the opportunities presented by this crisis, whether it is related to the open orientation by taking advantage of the European needs for the countries for the African countries to find alternatives to energy resources. These countries, African countries, can also benefit from the Russian need to open new horizons for cooperation with the countries of the African countries at all levels, which is the aim of confronting European and American sanctions, reducing the negative effects on the Russian economy and escaping from international isolation. I see it's the chance to the African countries to achieve some goals of their goals in economic, but dependence on the government of the African country can deal with this crisis in a new approaches, can deal with European countries, and can present alternative resources to the European, especially in energy, and in the same times can deal with Russia, because Russia in this time research about who can help it to decrease the sanctions about the Western sanctions on the economy, the Russian economy. So I see, so this crisis have bad or negative effects on Africa, but it have in the same time positive effects to the government of the African countries to play a new role in the world, because all researchers see this crisis will shape or help it to shape the new world system in the future. So African countries and the Latin countries, and I see the South in general have the chance to play an important role in the world systems. In the final, I think you to listen my presentation and to invite me to participate with you in this conference. Thank you. Welcome to Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions. So some one of you have a question for the speakers? No? No one? I don't know, maybe the speakers want to say a final comment, or maybe we close the panel. You want to add something? No. See, now it's time to questions. Sí, ya viene Ivana.
Well, welcome Donia, Dowidar, and Ahmed, Taher, and also Adriana, Franco. Thank you to be here in this third colloquium, framing Africa as the epicenter of the world. And I think in your, well, it has been very interesting to see the dispute of Africa between these imperial, I say they are imperial countries, Russia, China, and USA. I think Africa right now is very important for all the commodities that they have, especially the earth rares, and also the mines and many other minerals that are part of the future, of the economy of the future right now, the digital economy, also for the climate change. It's been that for the just in transition that we are working to have less oil and all of that. But how do you see? I would like if you can make a comment. What will happen? Because between this conflict, this war, how do you see? How will be the expectations of the countries of Africa? And also, Donia work is very interesting. How globalization and how the insertions of country as Egypt has lost their own sovereignty in food, and also other countries has also lost their sovereignty by all the by the globalization process. So that will be just if you can make a comment, a very short comment. How do you see right now this dispute of Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have another question, please.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Just a follow-up question to what Alicia was saying earlier. First question to Donia. So you mentioned the issue about the Ethiopian dam and how it affects the food security in Egypt. But I'm surprised to see that the arable land percentage increased even after the building of the dam. Can you talk a little bit about how much the construction of the dam affected access to land, affected the size of arable land, and affected availability of water for small farmers in Egypt? My second question is for both of you, for Adriana and Ahmed. Maybe I missed, but I did not hear you taking side to recommend what's the right direction for Africa. For example, Dr. Ahmed, you said, okay, Africa has an opportunity for either to go with Europe or to go with Russia to take advantage of the conflict. So based on your study, which side do you think is the best approach for African countries? I know there are a lot of differences among African countries, but based on your assessment, which approach is beneficial for African countries? Should they go with China/Russia side, or should they go with the European/American approach? Adrian, probably the same thing for you. You mentioned about how Russia was supporting some of the people, maybe during the socialist system, during the Cold War system. African countries benefited from that, but now there is a dilemma for them also whether to go with the European side to support Ukraine or with the Russian side because they have all these energy agreements and strategies with them. So is it possible for you to take a side and to recommend what's best for the continent? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you will answer in order to participation. So first, Donia, after Donia, Adriana, and finally, Ahmed Taher.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So I will thank you, Professor Alicia, for your. I will start with the comment of what you said. So I think that the loss of food sovereignty in Egypt, we can't be right now autosufficient. So I was proposing, but on another paper, that we have to be pan-African dependent instead of being Western and Occidental market dependent on food. So we have to work on our partnership with the African countries to change things, starting to relate with the question on the Ethiopian dam. I just want to say that the small increasing arable land, it comes mostly from the exploitation of the underground water in the desert. So it's and on another mega project that was done to take water from the Nile River to the arable land in the desert, or the reclaimed land in the desert. Why I'm talking about the risk of the Ethiopian dam and why it doesn't affect Egypt completely now, and because the second filling of the Ethiopian dam, it's not applicable yet. It didn't start yet. The huge risk and the increasing of the poverty hydraulic risk in Egypt will be in place when the filling of the second filling of the dam will start. That's why now internationally they are trying to resolve the problem, and Egypt in a diplomatic way is working on the stopping of the second filling of the dam. I hope I replied to the question and also commented on the Professor Alicia talk intervention.
Thank you, Donna.
I'll try to answer both questions. So, but I don't know if I'm gonna succeed with that. I think that I can take a side, being outside the continent, being not part of the continent. But I think that Russia is like China or Western direction is kind of the same. I think they are thinking about the continent only for the extraction of resources. They are not thinking about people. They are not thinking about the interest or the well-being of African people. So I think that it is the same. No, I don't think that there's an alternative in these proposals. That's why I think, well, I established in the presentation that it is an intercapitalist dispute, because they are having a conflict to direct or control the capitalist system, not to change the relationship that they have with the continent, the dependency that has been created. No, they are promoting the same thing. But I think that also the demonstrations in favor of Russia or China can be understood because of all the violence and all the coloniality that has been imposed historically. No? But I think there's no, well, in that vision, there's no option in or an alternative in the proposal of these actors. So thinking about the continent, also like the continent of the future, in a capitalist point of view, I think it's problematic because we are seeing also the continent as a source of resources for the benefit of the economy. And I also think that in the crisis of, well, the ecological crisis, the alternative is not renewable energy or hybrid cars, for example. No, that's not the solution, because all the infrastructure we need to make a renewable energy or hybrid cars is based on oil energy. So there's really not an alternative in that point of view. We need to see the continent, yeah, like the continent of the future, but not because of its resources. Because of the philosophy, because of the epistemes of the people, because of what they are proposing. No? So following what Tshisekedi, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, said, we need to hear to African people. We need to hear their alternatives, their propositions, and make a dialogue with that in order to change the world in which we are living. That, well, I think so, but I think that's right.
Thank you. And finally, we are listening to Ahmed Taher, please.
Yes, thank you for your question, and I will complete which my friend said before. We about how African country achieve advantages from this crisis. I see African countries can work on two tracks. The first is with the open sites by offering an alternative to Russia in the field of energy. And Africa can also be the world's factory as an alternative to China. Although they are difficult in this regard, but it can be benefit from the light of the Western vision to rearrange the movement of industry globally. I see the Europe and the American research rearranged the how to establish the factors in the other places instead of China. So I see African is a suitable place for the Europe and the American United States to establish factors in different industry. So African country can achieve some advantage from this crisis to achieve education, to take attention from urban, to give the people of the countries many attention in education, in health, and other fields. So I confirmed about two points about the European and African countries. The first for the energy instead of Russia, and the second factor of the world instead of China. This is a chance to Africa and the Latin America to achieve to benefit from this crisis. The second, on another sides, with the Russian, I see also the African country can can achieve some benefits from the relation between Russia and the African countries in support if can support the trade exchanges between two parts, because I see the African countries is a big consumers in the world, and they can Russia present all goods, all service to the African market. This is the first point for Russia, and another, Russia also can benefit from the African country in the international organization, like in the United Nations and another organization which African countries give their voice to the Russia, or refused to voting against Russia. I see also in the finally, I see it is the chance to the African countries to achieve their benefits between the relation between African countries and Europe, and African countries and the Russia and the China. So if the African countries put new approaches to how to deal the relation between the countries and the two sides, I think African countries will achieve many advantages. But this is difficult to African countries to achieve this, because many people, many countries in Africa don't work together. This is the first factor, and many African countries suffered from conflicted internal instability, internal, like in Sudan, like in Congo, like in Kenya, like in this is a problem. Because so I think it's the first step to achieve benefits of this crisis. We must do we should put a new approach about how African countries work together first, and the second step work with European and work to Russia. But in the fact, it's in the short term, it's difficult to benefit from this crisis. No, but we hope to achieve benefit in the longer term if the African countries can arrange the relation between the countries in the south, between the African countries, Latin countries, and some countries, another countries who suffered from this crisis, and which refused to pace or compromise with Ukraine, with Russia, or with the United States. Thank you.